the church here. The very recent history is that the current congregation that meets here at St Barnabas have been here since 2010. So before 2010, the buildings were in fairly poor state. They'd been closed for about 20 or 30 years. The Diocese of London, which sort of oversees them, was looking at ways of repurposing or redeveloping, and an enterprising archdeacon at the time said to another church, "We've got this building, please could you do something with it?" So a new congregation started back in 2010, along with my predecessor, who was the first vicar of the current iteration of the congregation. We're made up of about 45 adults and 25 children or so. That's the recent history. The slightly longer term history, let me take you back 150, 160 years or so to the 1870s and 1880s. At the time, Shacklewell was largely a residential area, although it was industrialising quite quickly. So I don't know if you noticed as you were walking along Shacklewell Lane, there's a building on the left-hand side that's called the Factory. It's now been repurposed. There's an art studio and a cafe on the ground floor and residential spaces above. The Factory has been there for a very long time. Originally, it was a factory building, and it was a printworks called Ayr and Spottiswoode on the corner of Shacklewell Lane over there. And into this industrialising area, the Merchant Taylors' School, which was a school down in the City of London, decided to build effectively a youth centre and a school. That's the building that you're sitting in now. So this building came first. It was built finished in 1891, and the idea was that this space would be a schoolroom and youth centre, and the space upstairs that we'll go and see in a moment was a chapel space. That was the idea. There was a tin tabernacle out at the back, and that came down, and building work on the church building started in 1909. At the time, in that sort of era of Victorian enterprise, it was fairly common for England's private schools to engage in good works and acts of benevolence in various communities. Church building was one of the things that they were engaged in. So if you come across a church that's got the word Eton in the title, or Harrow or that kind of thing, it's because it was built by the public school at the time. St Barnabas, work started in 1909. It was consecrated in 1929. So the building work was interrupted by the First World War. It was designed by, good morning, welcome. The architect was a Merchant Taylors' schoolboy. So he was called C.H. Reilly, Charles Reilly, and he was commissioned to design the church when he was only 24 years old. So he was quite young at the time. He hasn't left behind a significant body of work, so I think St Barnabas is just about the only building that he designed that it was a solo project of his, but he was fairly influential in British architecture at the time. So he lectured in Liverpool and in various other places, and was influential, particularly I think in the movement towards this more modernist style. He pioneered that sort of development. St Barnabas was finished in 1929. As you'll see when we go into the church, that more modernist style is reflected in the architecture and in the materials that we used for the building itself. So it's very sparse. You'll see that it's mainly just brick and concrete. So there's a concreted, vaulted ceiling all the way back to a dome that you'll see near the altar. Critics and architects will say it's somewhere between a sort of neo-Byzantine kind of style with some modernist kind of elements interwoven. I'll let you decide when you're in there as to exactly how you'd like to define it. Much of the internal decoration was provided by a sculptor called Tyson Smith. That was added a bit later on, so we think in the late 1930s, 1940s. Some of the very earliest photos of the building don't include the distinctive blue pillars that you'll see at the front. So that was added later on, we think in the 1930s, 1940s. Usually churches in that sort of Byzantine style would be very ornately decorated, but as I said, partly due to budgetary restrictions and partly due to C.H. Reilly's taste, it's much more sparse, much more stripped back brickwork and concrete floors. The critic Ian Nairn, who wrote a book about 30 years ago on British architecture, described it as the best church of its date in London. Suggesting that England could so easily have stepped over into modernism from here instead of relapsing into an eclectic fog. Which is, maybe we still haven't emerged from that, who knows. As I say, Charles Reilly was a merchant tailor's schoolboy. He grew up in Stoke Newington, so not far away from here, and knew the area well. He had quite a personal engagement with St Barnabas, so not only had he designed the church itself, but there is some record of a shortened, quite intense love affair between Reilly and the sister of one of the first mission priests. So when the church was first started, the Merchant Taylors School provided a number of mission priests who were priests here. And after a long evening walk around the Stoke Newington reservoirs, Reilly and, we don't know her name quite, but Reilly became engaged. Sadly, the engagement didn't last very long, and that was the end of it. But that was his particular engagements with the building and personally. A couple of unusual features that you may notice. The church doesn't face east, so it's actually north facing, and the end of the building where the altar is, you'll see it when we get in there, is located in what we call liturgical east, but it's not actually east facing. And you'll see that the layout of the sanctuary communicates a very particular style of theology, and in particular the kind of dominant at the time Anglo-Catholic theology that was quite present in the Church of England. So there's one feature in particular to draw attention to, is if you go and have a look at the altar itself, you'll notice as you get up there that behind the altar is an enormous slab of concrete that's probably just over 6 feet high. And the idea was, behind having that concrete slab there, was that it prevented anyone from standing behind the altar. So rather than the priest being able to stand behind the altar facing the congregation, which you may have seen happening in various churches, the priest will have to stand on the other side of the altar, facing away from the congregation and facing towards God. That was the kind of theological idea that was communicated architecturally. So please do go and have a look at that. You'll also notice that there isn't a pulpit in the building. I don't think there ever has been. I did have an email from someone a few years ago saying they were trying to trace a history of a pulpit that they thought had been here. We spent quite a long time looking through various histories of various churches locally and found that there wasn't actually a pulpit here at all ever, but you may notice that there isn't a pulpit here at all. I think that's everything that I should probably say. I'm sure you'll have all sorts of questions as we go around, but I think the best thing to do at this point is just to go and have a look. What we'll start by doing, I think, is we'll go upstairs and just have a look at that room that was initially a chapel space. Then we'll come back through here and out of that door and into the church itself. Usually in the Church of England, in that we are not a parish church, and in fact St Barnabas has never been a parish church, so we don't have the usual sort of area of land or geography that is sort of ours to take care of. It's always just, because this church was built by the Merchant Taylors School, it's always just been viewed as a sort of semi-independent sort of mission station. That's how the Church of England would think of it now at this point. So yeah, we're not a parish church, so we don't tend to have the kind of usual weddings and baptisms and funerals and that kind of side to our ministry, which is in some ways is helpful. It allows us to do other things, particularly with our spaces, and allows us a degree of independence in terms of pursuing projects and initiatives that we want to pursue. Thank you. The people that I've met who remember St Barnabas from the 1950s, some even from the 1940s, they're very, very local. So one of the things you'll notice about St Barnabas is that it's very hidden. I don't know if you struggle to see it on your way up this morning. It's quite hard to find, which meant that most of the initial congregation were drawn from the surrounding streets. So there are streets surrounding the site, Seal Street and April Street and Perch Street, just over to the north, Shacklewell Lane itself. But yeah, we didn't really ever have that larger footprint, as it were. The Merchant Taylors School, it's probably just worth saying, began to withdraw and from St Barnabas in the 1950s and 1960s, at which point St Barnabas came under the auspices of St Paul's West Hackney. So that's the parish that we are in at the moment. It's the parish of St Paul's West Hackney. St Paul's itself is on the corner of Amherst Road and Stoke Newington Road. And for a long time, St Paul's had overview of St Barnabas, and the vicar there would also run the congregation here. I think by the mid-90s, the congregation here had dwindled away quite significantly, and that was when they decided that the time had come to close it. You will see when we get into St Barnabas, into the church itself, that the church is in quite poor condition and has been for a long time. There hasn't really been any work happening for various reasons to the building for a number of years, probably 40 or 50 years. And when the congregation who are currently here arrived, they decided that they would renovate this space. So the roof, this building had fallen in. There were lots of pigeons inside and in all the spaces. So the congregation decided to renovate and redevelop this space so that there was a usable space for all sorts of things besides the church's ministry, and decided to get to the church building later on. Later on has arrived, so we are trying to get some money together at the moment to begin redeveloping and maintaining the church building itself. One of the things that we're looking at doing later on this year is an oral history project. So as I said, we've got some connections with some people who remember St Barnabas from the 40s and 50s. And Shacklewell itself, I don't know if Shacklewell is a new place to you, but people who have been in Shacklewell for a long time worry slightly that it's disappearing. Particularly because Dalston is becoming so well known and so high profile. The actual residents of Shacklewell feel slightly, I think, vulnerable, and we're trying to just capture some of that kind of history and heritage, particularly through an oral history project later on this year. So maybe in a year's time you'll be able to visit again and come have a look at the oral history project, which would be great. Thank you. Thank you. That's all right. You'll notice one or two original features. We think that the tiles around the wall are original to the building, and there's in the storage cupboard just to the side over there, there's which we think was probably the office of the priest missioner who was here to oversee the project. There's a little fireplace in there, which we think was original from the time. Through the winter months, because our church building is so cold, the congregation tends to meet in here, as well as it's hired out for various other events, concerts and rehearsals and that kind of thing. Through the summer months, you'll notice just there's some plywood on the walls over there and over there. because we're experimenting with an artist studio space. So in the summer months, this room is completely converted, and there are all sorts of temporary partition walls that go up, and we have 6 or 7 artists working in here through the warmer months when the congregation are able to use the church building again. So that's mostly what this space is currently used for. Yeah, it is. As you walked into this building. It is very cold, so it doesn't really get much use through the winter. So you're really viewing it in its sort of winter mode. Things are still covered up until we get everything out again in the next few weeks. So you'll notice a number of things architecturally. The vaulted ceiling, which is quite unusual. Again, it's just brickwork and concrete. There's never really been any decoration in here particularly, so we've never had sort of plaster falling off the walls or that kind of thing. It's always just been this very sparse, very stripped back kind of aesthetic and feel to it, apart from these blue pillars, which form the rood screen and were added after the church was finished in 1929. We think they came at the end of the 1930s and 1940s. You'll notice that, please do feel free to wander around wherever you would like to. You're very welcome to have a look at everything. You'll notice that there's an organ and an organ loft just over to your left. The stairs to go up to the organ loft are very hazardous, so you're welcome if you'd like to, but please do so at your own risk. They're very narrow and very steep to get up to the organ. Are there any questions at this point about anything that you can see? If not, you're very welcome to go and wander as you'd like. Yes?
Is the font of any significance? Is it concrete or stone?
It's so you'll see it at the back. Over there, yeah, it's concrete, yes, in keeping, I think, with the general feel of the place.
And what's the story on the painting behind it?
The story on the painting behind it, yes. Unfortunately, the light isn't very good at the back. It's seen from one of the Gospels, and you'll see paintings around the place. You have to get quite close to them to be able to make them out. Those sorts of details when they were added and the artist might have been. Records either just weren't kept particularly, or we're not quite sure where they are, if there were any. It isn't very far away. The sound really bounces around quite a lot. When we arrived, when the congregation arrived, I don't know if you can notice on the floor, the concrete floor, you'll notice these long lines running from one end of the building to the other. They are the residue of a brown lino that covered the floor. So there were 5 very long strips of a sort of hard resin lino that when the congregation arrived was sort of falling apart and was quite hazardous, so it was easy to fall over and it was sort of rotting away in various places. So they took it all out, I think rightly, just to expose the concrete floor. I suspect one of the reasons that it was here was because of the acoustic. It was to try to deaden the sound a little bit, because otherwise everything does just bounce around. Some musicians that have been here love that kind of thing, some really don't like it at all, so it just depends on what your thing is, really. Yes?
What is the state of your organ? Does it work?
The organ does work. It's working. The bigger issue with the organ is the power supply to the organ is quite erratic. So it's much. If we want to use it, we have to run a power supply to it. But it does work. It's in working order. Yeah.
What kind of organ is it? You know who to make it work?
That's a good question. I don't know actually off the top of my head. Let me fired heating system with something that would be more environmentally friendly. So the heating is a big item that we need to get done, along with the electrics and some of the brickwork at the top. We think the roof is actually in pretty good condition, but the brickwork up at the top, where it's been repointed previously, hasn't been done particularly well. So that's an issue too. So it's those kinds of things that we need to resolve in the next few years.